Genesis chapter 36 tonight. And I was thinking about this passage, and, of course, we're covering the genealogy of Esau. And I just was wondering, have you ever had a sibling rival? Now, if you want to know anything about, if you've never had a sibling rival, you don't know anything about sibling rivalry, then just come over to my house for a little while, and you can just watch for a little while and just watch my kids. I got 5 of them, all too close together in age. And they fight over everything. In fact, just a few days ago, I mean, it was probably a week ago or so, we were getting in the car to go to the movies. We were going to go see a movie for one of their birthdays, and one of them was just throwing a fit, and so we just decided that, and they fight each other all the time, And so we just decided, you know what? No, we don't want to do that. So we drove home, and we got out of the car, and everybody got out. And it's been amazing because we just told them, you know what, anymore, whenever you guys act up, it's just too much for us. We're just going to go back home. They've been perfect in the car lately. It's been awesome. Sometimes you just have to make that radical statement. But I remember as a kid, early on in my childhood, it was just me and my sister Terry, and I love Terry. I mean, she is my oldest sister, but I've always felt that she was kind of out to get me. It kind of still feel that way. I don't know, maybe there's some remnants from my childhood, but I think it was probably, what did it was, I remember, well, I barely remember. She remembers it more vividly than I do, and I probably remember it just from her telling the story. But I remember this story about her chasing me through the house. She was going to kill me, I'm pretty sure. And I was running from her, and she was wearing this green little outfit, and she had this cute little ponytail, and she had this little round face. And she was running after me, and I ran through the door, and I slammed the door, and it hit her in the nose, and blood all over her little outfit. And she still tells that story to this day. I remember my mom kind of was of the parenting philosophy that if they're abusing each other, let them finish, and then just send them to their room until they can hug each other. And so I remember standing in the hallway, and I vividly, we had this red carpet, and this curio cabinet right there. And I remember just standing there, just punching, and she's punching me, and I'm punching her, and we're just going at it, just fighting, and we were the same size. She's 2 years older than me, but she grew to be 5 feet tall, and I grew to be 6 feet tall. So we were the same size, 2 years younger, and we're just fighting all the time. But as we got older, she used her wit to get to me, and she was older, a couple years older, and always very brilliant. So she would always manipulate me, to do whatever she wanted me to do. And so, those things. But the one thing I remember, the one thing purposely that I did, and then this is just sheer evil. You just have to realize the evilness of my heart. I remember that I was playing with my little bow and arrow in the house, and I wasn't supposed to be, right? It was one of those plunger ones, but I still wasn't supposed to be. And I was playing with shooting it, and I had my little quiver, and I'm pulling an arrow out, and I draw it back, and she came up to me and just snotty, as all get out, you're not supposed to be playing in that in the house, and just started, nah, I'm going to tell Mom and Dad. And I just turned it and bopped her right in the face, just right in the nose. I just remember doing that. And I got my bow and arrow taken away. But in my little, 6-year-old heart, it was worth it. Just this evil, right? This evil between siblings. That's what I'm trying to display here. But that's what we see with Jacob and Esau. And Esau becomes the arch enemy of Israel throughout their existence. And they started, if you remember, very early on fighting each other. And so in verse 1 it says, "Now this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom." And so you notice he has 2 different names for him there, but the land of Edom would be named after Esau, and his name would also be called Edom. "And Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan, Adah, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite, Aholibama, the daughter, Aholibama." If you have a girl, this is a great, Aholibama. It sounds like a politician's wife, doesn't it? Aholibama? Something like that. Anyway, Aholibama, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibnon, the Hivite. So you have these 3 women who are Aholibama and Anah and No, never mind. Aholibama, daughter of Anah, and Ada, the daughter, and then, So you have these couple of wives, and there's going to be one more, I think. Yeah, base math. There we go. I'm in verse 3. But interesting here, in verse 20, if you look down to verse 20 really quick, it says, "These are the sons of Seir, the Horite, who inhabited the land of Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, and Anah." And so Anah is listed here as a Horite. And so that means that Aholibama, this woman who is one of Esau's wives, this is one of the, if you remember back in Genesis chapter 26, he took wives to himself, and the first couple of wives he took, which were these two ladies here, Aholibama and Ada, these two girls were the ones who were a curse to his mother and father, Isaac and Rebekah. And they were grieved in soul. Remember, it says they were grieved in soul because of the wives of Esau. And so he, trying to appease his parents, went. What's so funny is everybody's laughing at me. No? Is my zipper down? Okay, no, it's not. Okay. These two girls were the ones that were plaguing his parents. So he went and found another wife from the daughters of Ishmael, trying to, thinking, oh, we're keeping it in the family. And really, it wasn't any blessing to them. But Isaac and Rebekah were grieved because of these women. Now, Aholibama, being a Horite, that means that she was from the lineage of the Anakim. And you remember the Anakim were the ones who were, that lived in that region that were giants, the region of Seir. And so, a big, beautiful woman, no doubt. But probably some demonic lineage, part of her lineage was not that great. And so probably her influence that would bring Esau to move back down to Seir, to the area where her father lived and her relatives lived. But her name means tent of the high places. And so, some commentators think maybe she was a temple prostitute. Hard to say. What this woman was, but usually the high places is where they worshipped, demonic spirits or false gods. And so Esau bears here all of his sons in Canaan, and then he'll go back to Seir. Interesting in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 20 through 22, it tells us this. In regard to the giants formerly dwelt there, but the Amorites and the Zamzummim, a people of great numerous, tall as the Anakim, but the Lord destroyed them before them, and they dispersed them, and dwelt in their place, just as he had done for the descendants of Esau who dwelt in Seir, when he destroyed the Horites from before them. They dispossessed them and dwelt in their place, even to this day. And so when Esau went down to Seir to establish what would become Edom, the land of Esau and his descendants, he drove out. So he was bad to the bone. He went in and he drove out these giants that lived in this place, him and his sons. And so it says, going on with his wives, verse 3, it says, "And Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nebajoth." So we're going to try to pronounce these names. So he married this woman, again, to please his parents. She was the daughter of Ishmael. Now Ada bore Eliphaz to Esau, and Basemath bore Ruel. Now in Genesis chapter 26, it's interesting. You want to turn there with me real quick. In Genesis chapter 26, and I'm just going to show you this because I don't want you to be freaked out by it, or somebody tries to show you this to trip you up. It says there in verse 34, when Esau was 40 years old, he took wives, Judith, the daughter of Beri, the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite. And they were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. And so here you have, Basemath, but then the Judith is a different name altogether. And in some translations, it even translates the first name differently. And so you have these two different women, and the names of their fathers sometimes are even different. And so people get tripped up by that, and some people say, oh, well, Moses messed up when he wrote it, when he copied it down or something like that, or, The reality is that people, just like Esau was also known as Edom, these people also had different names. This guy who, Anna, who was called Barry back there, we'll find later on, Barry just means the man of the well. And later on, that man finds some wells out in the desert, and so that's probably why he was called Barry by the people. We'll find that later on in the passage. We'll look at that. But anyway, so don't be tripped up by the names given, maybe names given in marriage. They were or known by two names, just as Esau was. Whatever the case, scholars agree that they're the same women. And so, verse 5, it says, and Aholibama bore Jeush, Jaalam. I can pronounce these wrong in lots of different ways. The thing about it is I had them all down before, and it's just sitting up here in front of you all that I have to all of a sudden pronounce these stupid names. And then Korah, these were the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his household, his cattle and all his animals, and all his goods which he had gained from the land of Canaan, and went to the country away from the presence of his brother Jacob. For their possessions were too great for them to dwell together, and the land where they were strangers could not support them because of their livestock. So these two guys, they had a rough start, starting out fighting. When was the first time, do you guys remember when the first time Jacob and Esau fought was? In the womb, yeah. These guys, remember Rebekah? She's pregnant. Isaac loved his wife Rebekah, but she was barren. And so the Bible tells us that he prayed for his wife, and she conceived. And so beautiful story of faith and trusting God and seeking God in a difficult situation. She conceived, but then her sons were warring against each other in her womb. And she goes to Isaac and she says, if all is well, why am I thus? Why is this happening? I have indigestion, these two kids. And so she goes to the Lord. She inquires of the Lord, and the Lord tells her that there are two nations warring in her womb. And this will be the case. These guys are warring even still today. It's always been that way, and it always will be until the end. Esau and Jacob, sons of Isaac, both sons of Abraham, but that sibling rivalry would never end. Now, in this case, remember when Jacob was coming back from Laban and he met Esau, Esau seemed like he'd forgiven Jacob. Now, at first, maybe not, because he comes with 400 men, and he's coming on the way, and Jacob hears that he's coming with 400 men, and so he sends these gifts before him, hoping to appease Esau. And by the time Esau gets to him, he seems to be amicable. Like, hey, glad to see you. Let's go back home. Everything's good. I don't need these gifts. And Jacob kind of forced his hand to take the gifts, because if he takes the gifts, then it's kind of like, I promise I won't hurt you type of a thing. And so he accepts the gifts, refuses help to get back, says, I'll get back on my own. And remember, Jacob didn't go. He hung out outside the promised land for a while. Finally ends up, he goes to Succoth, and then he goes to Shechem, and then he goes finally to Bethel. And last time we saw him going from Bethel finally down to the place where his father, had his tents pitched, and he would be there with Isaac, it would seem, just trying to figure out the timeline here, and I had to check out the annals of the world to figure it all out. But he would be in the land of Canaan for about 20 years, and the last 10 years with his father. So before his father dies, he just hangs out with him for about 10 years. And Esau seems to be with him, and everything seems to be good between the two brothers. It seems like they have kind of made peace. Both of them are doing well financially. But then all of a sudden, it says that they were having a difficulty in the land because they both had these large herds. Now you remember the same thing happened with Lot and Abraham. They were camped together, and the herdsmen of Lot were fighting with the herdsmen of Abraham, and finally Abraham just says, you know what, look whichever way you want to go. You pick whichever place, I'll go the opposite direction. And so remember, Lot looks up and sees the fertile plains towards the Jordan River, and he finds that him pitching his tent near Sodom and Gomorrah. What is interesting about this is that it's probably not too far where the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah were near the Dead Sea. That just the other side is where Esau ends up going. But Esau picks everything up. You know, he sees that his livestock, he's too numerous in people and livestock. The land is being depleted, and so he moves. And no doubt the hand of the Lord, as Jacob stays within the promised land, in the land of Canaan, and keeps his herds and flocks there. But they've been there together and then buried their father there together, as we saw in chapter 35. So it says, so verse 8, so Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom, and this is the genealogy of Esau, the father of the Edomites in Mount Seir. And so the Edomite race is made up of Horites, Canaanites, and Ishmaelites. That's what this group of people are. And of course, the descendants of Abraham mix all up in there. Verse 10, it says, these were the names of Esau's son: Eliphaz, son of Adah, the wife of Esau, and Ruel, the son of Basemath, the wife of Esau. And the sons of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, and Kenaz. And these are all great, strong male names. So if you're planning on having any more boys, there you go. Now, it would seem possible that this Eliphaz, probably not this Eliphaz, but a later Eliphaz. You know, of course, people name their children after their descendants. But you have Eliphaz, who has this son Teman, and probably amongst the people of Teman, Eliphaz becomes a popular name. And we don't know how many generations away it would be, but we find interestingly enough, in Job chapter 4, verse 1, one of the friends of Job, remember Job had these friends, that if you have these types of friends, you don't need enemies type of friends, that came to comfort him in his sickness. Well, one of them was a Temanite. And interestingly enough, Teman becomes kind of a chief, you'll see later, in this chapter. He becomes a chief of a region, and a region of Edom becomes known as Teman. And not only that, but sometimes, and in some historical references, all of Edom is referenced as Teman. And so he became a very powerful tribe. But in Job chapter 1, or 4 rather, verse 1, it says, Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, and so we see this friend of Job is the same as name as the ancestor, but I'm guessing that they didn't name the city before this Eliphaz was born, right? I mean, so he was a Temanite, meaning he was probably from that son named after his ancestor. So interesting how all of that comes together. Now, some people would say, and I would disagree with this, just because of what we know of the Edomites and their history and things like that. But in chapter 36 of Genesis, verse 33, it mentions Jobab, the son of Zerah of Bozrah, being the king, one of the kings of Edom. And some commentators insist that this Jobab is in fact Job. And I suppose that's possible, but it's hard to say. But anyway, so we do pretty much understand that Eliphaz the Temanite was a descendant of Esau, one of the friends of Job. The book of Job is actually older than any of the books in the Bible. In fact, predates Genesis. And just because of its construction and the things that are written in it, it's pretty obvious to scholars that it's the oldest book in the Bible. And so it's before the law, before the children of Israel, before all of that stuff really was established. And so here we have a reference to that. So in chapter 36, verse 12, it says, now Timnah was the concubine of Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bore Amalek to Eliphaz, and these were the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. Now, does that sound familiar? Amalek. You remember him? Anybody? Amalek, remember when Saul was king, and he was told by the Lord to go to the Amalekites and to completely wipe them out. And so what does he do? He goes to the Amalekites. He keeps the king alive. Maybe some of the others, we don't know. But he keeps the king alive, and he leaves the sheep and the goats. He brings them, and remember, Samuel comes and he says, what is the sound of this bleating of sheep? And he says, well, we brought them to sacrifice to the Lord. Now you remember the Lord says, go in, utterly destroy them. Do not leave any of them alive. They had become very wicked before the Lord. And who knows what kind of atrocities they were involved in. But that's always the case when people are involved in that type of thing, that the Lord would send someone in to completely destroy the land. And he brings Amalek, he brings the sheep and the goats, and remember Samuel says to Saul, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. And basically what he's saying is to obey the Lord is better than to sacrifice to the Lord. A very valuable lesson for all of us. And so he takes his sword and he kills Amalek, and then he rebukes Saul and tells him that he's lost his kingdom. Well, somewhere along the line, a descendant of Amalek escaped or something, and a descendant of Amalek would have a descendant by the name of, I've lost my place in my notes. Haman. Remember Haman? Haman was the villain in the story of Esther. He was the one who hated Mordecai, and he hated the Jewish people, and so he tried to get the king to kill the Jewish people. And of course, Esther foils that plot, and Haman ends up being hung on his own gallows. But this persecution that came against the Jewish people was because of Amalek. So Amalek's mentioned here. He's kind of an important character. And so verses 13 through 14 list out Esau's sons, and verses 15 through 18 list out who would become the chiefs of Edom out of those sons. We're not going to read all those. I know you guys all read ahead, right? So you already read those. I'm not going to torture you by reading through all those names. And so verse 19 says, these were the sons of Esau, who is Edom, and these were their chiefs. Again, listing the sons of Seir here, it says in verse 20, these were the sons of Seir, the Horite, who inhabited the land of Lothan, Sobal, Zibeon, Anah, and he goes in and lists all those down to verse 23. And then in verse 24 it says, these are the sons of Zibeon, both Ajah and Anah. This was Anah who found the water in the wilderness as he pastured the donkeys of his father Zibeon. So Beri, you have Beersheba, right, which is about speaking of a well, it's the place of the well. Beri meaning well, and so that's probably why his name is listed as Beri in Genesis chapter 26, Esau's father-in-law. And then continuing on with these chiefs all the way down to verse 30. Now you'll notice something as you read through there, that there are a few women listed among the chiefs. So some of these tribes had women leaders over them. And that was something that wasn't super common in ancient days, but even Israel at one point had a female judge. You remember Deborah, or Deborah, however you wanted to say her name. And of course, because she sent, is it Balak? She sent Balak to go kill the guy who, was oppressing them, and he was too scared to go without her. And so because you won't go, a victory is going to be given to the woman. And so a woman ends up killing the bad guy instead of the victory going to the man, defender of Israel. And so it's interesting. We see this here as well, and we see these women ruling over tribes and parts of this. And we might get used to the idea of a female leader, because that might be what's happening to us, and it's kind of an interesting thought. Well, who knows this next election? I hear a lot of talk about it. The thing about it is, anymore, when it comes to election, when it comes to politics, I will believe anything is possible. I will believe, because first of all, I did not believe that President Obama would get elected. I just didn't believe it. I was like, no, I don't think the country's, there yet. I don't think it's going to happen. It happened. I was like, wow, it's contrary to my thoughts. And then that he got reelected. Didn't that shock you? Didn't it shock everybody? Yeah, it was shocking. Now we have two wonderful choices for president. And if someone were to say, you know what, Trump's going to be our next president, I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt it whatsoever, because I honestly didn't think he would make it past the first day of anything running for the Republican nomination. And he makes it all the way to the end. I'm for sure it's going to be contested convention, and then he's there, and he's like, what just happened? Who didn't do their job? What is going on in this country? It's crazy. And then on the other side, we have, somebody who, the FBI and everybody else just sweeping all the criminal activity under the rug. Let's just forget about every illegal thing. Oh, Benghazi, what is that? Nah, it never happened, right? And, Hillary Clinton is now going to be, probably, I wouldn't doubt it, at all if she becomes the next president. But why? Why do we have this happening in our country? Do we really have to ask? Honestly, do we really have to ask? You get what you pay for. You get what you deserve. These things we say to our kids all the time, right? You get what you pay for. You get what you deserve. And good, because this is the first election that I've had no hope in our political system whatsoever. Yeah. I've had no, okay, maybe this person will be a good candidate, and yet we see people throwing themselves, to their party lines, mostly. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this on Sunday, just because that's where we're at in Romans. But this is an interesting passage in Isaiah chapter 3, and because it talks about some women chiefs in this section, I thought it would be interesting to just discuss this a little bit. In Isaiah chapter 3, verses 10 through 13, it says, "Say to the righteous that it shall be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings." So, you're righteous, you're a righteous nation, the good things are coming out of you. The fruit is going to be in the nation, right? It's gonna show in your economy. It's going to show in your, the safety, the amount of violence in the culture. It's just going to show throughout the culture that the nation is done righteously and that God is blessing them. It says, verse 11, "Woe to the wicked! It shall be ill with them, for the reward is in his hand, shall be given to him. As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, those who lead you cause you to err and destroy the way of your paths. The Lord stands up to plead and stands to judge the people." It's interesting because we have become a largely youth-driven culture. And what drives the youth drives the country. And then the next step, it says the curse for them is that their children are oppressing them and that they're ruled by women leaders. And that was the curse that came upon the people. I wonder what's in for our nation. And what do we do? What do we do as Christians in this case? I heard somebody say that they were going to take a barf bag to the poll with them. So after they cast their vote, they knew that they were probably going to have to, heave a little bit. Because what a distressing thing that we have before us. You know, I mean, one of ours, is one of our things is a criminal. The other one is, owns casinos and strip clubs. And, I mean, where's the nation gone? And so now we find ourselves at this crossroads where we can't look to the left and we can't look to the right. So which way do we look? Up. It's the only way we can look. And we call out to the Lord, and I love what it tells us in 2 Chronicles 7:14, that the people who are called by my name, if they will humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sin, and I will heal their land. See, that's what we need. It's so interesting how pulled the church is towards the world, and how much the church wants to look like the world and act like the world and be like the world, and yet the world is dying for something real. And if the Christians would just be Christians and go for what is real, that Jesus is real, and live our lives for that, then the world would see it and be attracted to it by the Holy Spirit, as the Holy Spirit uses us to convict the world. But this is where we are. So exciting times. You realize that's a Chinese curse. May you live in exciting times. And we do. We live in exciting times. It says, verse 31, and back to Genesis 36. Now these were the kings who reigned in the land of Eden before any king reigned over the children of Israel. Interesting. So you have these 7 kings it's going to list, of Jobab being one of them, and several others. Jobab, Hushman, Bedad, Hadad, all these different kings. I'm not going to read all of them, but you get the idea. There's just Edomite kings. William MacDonald said this of these guys. Moses, the author of Genesis, knew by divine revelation that Israel would eventually have a king, in Genesis chapter 35, verse 10. As 7 generations of the ungodly line of Cain were given in chapter 4, so 7 generations of kings in the ungodly line of Esau are mentioned here in verses 33 through 39. 7, the number of completeness, probably indicates the entire line. Not one of Esau's descendants is mentioned in God's registry of the faithful. All are lost in the obscurity of those who depart from the living God. They are temporary riches. They had temporary riches, and they passed from fame of this world, but nothing for eternity. Isn't that interesting? You think about, the life of Esau, and Esau made his mistake when he came in that day when he was hungry and he hadn't caught any food, and he cried out to Jacob, sell me your birthright. Give me your bowl of soup, rather. Give me your bowl of soup. And Jacob said, sell me your birthright, I'll give you a bowl of soup. And Esau was willing to sell his birthright, knowing, because Abraham died when he was 15 years old. Him and Jacob were 15 years old when Abraham died. And in 15 years, you think Abraham probably would have had a conversation, something about the promises that God had given their family and their descendants, especially to Esau, being the oldest brother, the one with the birthright. And Abraham would have told them, boys, these grandsons, you guys, have a heritage of no other people on the face of this earth, and that the Messiah is going to come through you. And Esau probably grew up with that knowledge, and in a moment of hunger, he was willing to trade off Jesus Christ for a bowl of soup. You see, that's why in Malachi it tells us, Jacob I have loved and Esau I have hated. It wasn't that God hated Esau as a person, but what he hated was unbelief. And that's what Esau represents, a perverse man, and that's what the New Testament calls him, a perverse man who was willing to sell off his birthright. He rejected Christ. And so as people who live in a culture that is corrupted and going downhill fast, we have to be those who cling tightly to Jesus, to be like Jacob, who yearned for the birthright, yearned for that. I mean, he didn't even know God yet, and he yearned to be the one who would have that responsibility to bring the Messiah into the world. Genesis chapter 36, verse 40. These are the names of the chiefs of Esau, according to their families and their places by their names. Chief Timnah, Chief Alva, Chief Jetheth, Chief Aholibama, Chief Allah, Chief Pinon, Chief Kenaz, Chief Teman, Chief Mibzar, Chief Magdal, Chief Iram. These were the chiefs of Edom, according to their dwelling places in the land of their possessions. Esau was the father of the Edomites. And so Edom would be the first nation as they lived there in the land of Edom, south of Israel, right there next to the Sinai Peninsula. And when the children of Israel would go out into the wilderness and go to enter into the promised land, Esau, or the Edomites, were the very first to attack them. Isn't that interesting? When Judah would be attacked by Babylon, Edom either helped or at least cheered on or rejoiced at the attack of Judah. And of course, Obadiah, the whole book of Obadiah is dedicated to that, that Edom had gone against Israel when Babylon came. And it's very possible that the remnant left in Edom, of Edom will play its hand in the coming against Israel in our day. You remember that when Israel was in the land after the Babylonian captivity, then of course Rome came into power. And who did they put in charge of the land of Israel? Herod, right? And the family of Herods, who were they? They were Idumeans. What is Idumea? Idumea is the Greek way to say Edom. They were Edomites. And so Herod and all of his descendants were Edomites. And so that's why, to the Romans, they didn't see any different between, an Edomite and a Jew. They're pretty much from the same group of family. Well, to the Jews, that was kind of a hard thing to have Herod over their temple. But there's an interesting psalm, Psalm 83, that seems to be a prophecy, and a lot of Bible scholars believe that this is a prophecy of the future. And some Bible scholars believe that this is something that's going to happen, what we're reading here in Psalm 83, something that will happen before Ezekiel 38 and 39 take place. And if you're familiar with those prophecies, that's when all the Arab nations around Israel attack Israel in the last days. But this is something that some believe, because this actually seems to fit the current political situation we have in Israel right now. But in Psalm 83, turn there with me, it says a psalm of Asaph, and it's Israel crying out to God. And it says, "Do not keep silent, O God. Do not hold your peace, and do not be still, O God. For behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people, and have consulted together against your sheltered ones. They have said, 'Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more.'" Isn't that interesting? So you have 70 AD, if you remember, in 70 AD, do you remember that far back, some of you? No? Okay. 70 AD is when Rome, with Titus, came into Jerusalem and leveled Jerusalem. Killed Jews. Josephus describes it was like carpet. The dead bodies were like carpet on the mountains of Judea. Just everywhere. People dying everywhere. It was just a horrible, horrible thing. And of course, Rome drove the Jews out of Jerusalem, out of Judea, and then they renamed it Philistia, which is what we now call Palestine. That's the, American way of saying it. And so now Palestine, or the land of the Palestinians or the Philistinians, is what that relates to. Is what the land of Israel has been called. and the people who dwelt there just have been renamed Palestinians. Now, it's interesting because if you look up the makeup of the people who live in that region and who lived in that region at the time that the Jews came back to the land, honestly, the majority of people who lived there in the land of Judea in 1948, when the Jews came back in, were Jews. A lot of Jews had already moved back into that land because they believed that it was their land and God wanted them to be there. And so they were counted amongst the Palestinians. But besides the Jews, there were all kinds of different people. There were Edomites, there were Syrians, there were all sorts of different people that make up who the Palestinians are today. And they all trace their lineages to different peoples. But it says, in this section, it says that these people want to take Israel so that their name is remembered no more. Now, that reminds me of just a few years back, the former president of Iran, when he said, we're going to take Israel off the map. I remember listening to, I think it was Joel Rosenberg, who said, it's the good thing about it is that this is the first time any Middle Eastern leader has ever acknowledged that Israel is on the map. So we're very excited about that because they just all believe that Israel's not supposed to be there and wouldn't acknowledge that. But Ahmadinejad said he was going to wipe Israel off the map, which he didn't do. But I think that that's interesting because that's exactly what this is saying here. We don't want Israel to be taken out. We want them to be remembered no more. This doesn't match any ancient battle that we can come up with. There was never a time when all these people hated Israel collectively and wanted them gone until today. And now today we see a geopolitical situation in the Middle East where Israel's there, her enemies are all around them, and guess what? All of them, not all of them are Arabs, not all of them are sons of Ishmael, not all of them are sons of Edom, but they all are what? They're all Muslims, right? They're all Muslims. And so it's interesting as we look at this, they want to cut Israel off from being a people, that they might be remembered no more. Verse 5, for they have consulted together in one consent. They have formed a confederacy against you, and then it lists off all of them. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagarites, so the Moabites, which are of course, the descendants of Lot. Gebal, Ammon, that's the other descendant of Lot, and Amalek, Philistia, and the inhabitants of Tyre. And so these are all the immediately bordering nations of the former Israel, and these are all the people who moved in to Israel, besides Jews who stayed there or Jews who moved back in there, that make up the Palestinian refugees, the people who were displaced when Israel came in. Now, let me just talk about that for a second because we get the wrong idea. And the news will tell us that Israel came in, drove all of these Palestinians out, and that they displaced them and they didn't have a homeland. Well, that's bull. First of all, when the League of Nations came together, which was what the United Nations was back in those days, they allowed Israel, through Ben-Gurion, to purchase the land of Israel. It was a desert wasteland at the time. Mark Twain described it as, there wasn't a tree in the place. During the Ottoman Empire, they cut down all the trees because the Turks were taxing every tree you had on your property you got taxed for. So they cut the trees down and just completely decimated the whole land. And so, there wasn't anything there but rocks and desert. And so what happened was Israel came in, they purchased the land back, they started a reforestation program, and, fulfilling prophecies that the desert would bloom, the desert places would become, a garden, and they did that. I mean, the Lord has done all of that, all these prophecies about Israel coming back into the land. But Israel, when they came back into the land, the League of Nations gave what was called Transjordan to the Palestinians if they didn't want to live amongst the Jews. And so they were allowed to move down to Moab and to Edom and those areas and find new shelter and find new homes. But Israel told the Palestinians, we don't want you to go. You're welcome to stay. Stay in your homes, stay in your places. But the people around them, the Saudi Arabia and all these countries who are planning on squashing the plantation of Israel, said, no, you come out. We will attack Israel, and we will give you your homes and their homes back. And so, of course, they came out. They attacked Israel, and God somehow supernaturally protected Israel, and now they're all upset. Whose fault is it? It's not theirs. So they're living in tents. And so, there's these refugees and people who say they're displaced out of Israel, to this day. And so he's saying all these people, the tents of Edom, of the Ishmaelites, the Moab, the Hagarites, Gebal, Ammon, and Amalekite, Philistia and its inhabitants and the inhabitants of Tyre, so that's the south and the north. Assyria also joined with them. And so Assyria being northern Iraq, small parts of Iran, they have helped the children of Lot, Selah. Deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera, as with Jabin at the brook Kiddush. And now if you remember these, you probably don't, but if you are a Bible scholar, you probably remember in Judges, these were the nations that the judges drove out and that God gave victory to Israel over. And so he's basically saying, all these people who are coming against Israel, don't want them on the map anymore, deal with them in the same way you dealt with them. And it's to deal with them as with Midian, of course that was with Gideon, and as with Sisera, with Jabesh and at the brook Kiddush, verse 10, who perished by Endor, who became a refuse on the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, yes, the princes like Zeba and Zalmunna. Remember these guys fighting against Gideon. Who said, let us make for ourselves the pastures of God for a possession. O my God, make them like the whirling dust, like the chaff before the wind. As the fire burns the woods, and as the flame sets the mountains afire, so pursue them with your tempest, and frighten them with your storm. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek your name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and dismayed forever. Yes, let them be put to shame and perish, that they may know that you, whose name alone is Lord, are the most high over all the earth. And so why would they need to know that his name is Lord and that he's the most high over? Because they worship a different God. So it is very possible that Edom has this plan or place in the future against Israel even there. But even farther into the future, now how many of you have heard that Israel is going to flee to Petra during the middle of the tribulation? Remember it talks about in Matthew chapter 24, and see, I used up all the time. So in Matthew chapter 24, you remember Jesus says, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let him who reads understand, flee to the mountain. If you're in the field, those who are in Judea, don't, go back into your house. If you're in the field, don't go back in your house. If you're on the rooftop, don't go down into your house, go straight and run. Head for the hills, basically, is what Jesus says. Now, interestingly enough, he's talking about the people who live in Judea, and he's talking about them, getting away. Of course, the mountains of Seir are right there, to flee to the south, go to the mountains of Seir, and hide, and clefts of the rock and all that stuff. Interestingly enough, in Isaiah chapter 16, and this is where we get that. This is where we get that whole concept of Israel going to Edom, this verse right here. Isaiah 16, verse 1, it says, send the lamb of the ruler of the land from Selah to the wilderness, to the mountain of the daughter of Zion. And Selah is Petra. That's another name for the ancient city of Petra. So that's where we get that. For it shall be as a wandering bird thrown out of its nest, so shall the daughters of Moab at the fords of the Arnon take counsel, execute judgment, make your shadow like the night of the middle of the day, hide the outcast, do not betray him who escapes. Let my outcast dwell with you, O Moab. Be a shelter to them from the face of the spoiler, for the extortioner is at an end. Devastation ceases, the oppressors are consumed out of the land. In mercy the throne will be established, and one will sit on it in truth, in the tabernacle of David, judging and seeking justice and hastening righteousness. So it basically goes to these people who were driven out, God's people who were driven out, and they take refuge in Selah, in Moab, and in Ammon. And it's interesting because when the Antichrist rules, it seems that that section, which would be current-day Jordan, is somehow going to be off limits to the Antichrist. He's not going to have access to that region. Although, probably trying to get at God's people in Israel. So in Isaiah 63, we have a really interesting passage. And it says this, Isaiah 63, verse 3, I have trodden the winepress alone, and from the peoples no one was with me, for I have trodden them in my anger and trampled them. Actually, I should have read from verse 1. Let's see, Isaiah 63. Sorry. I didn't cut the whole verse in there. I wanted. Okay. Isaiah 60. Who is this who comes from Edom with dyed garments from Bozrah? And Bozrah is another name of the capital of Edom. This one who is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength, who speaks in righteousness, mighty to save. Why is your apparel red, and why are your garments like one who treads the winepress? And he responds, I have trodden the winepress alone, and from the people no one was with me, for I have trodden them in my anger and trampled them in my fury. Their blood is sprinkled upon my garments. I have strained all my robes, for the day of vengeance is in my heart, and the year of my redeemed has come. I looked, but there was no one to help, and I wondered that there was no one who could uphold. Therefore, my own arm brought salvation for me, and my own fury has sustained me. I have trodden down the peoples in my anger and made them drunk in my fury and brought them down in their strength of the earth. And so what it would seem is that when Jesus returns, his people are in Israel, or in Edom, hiding, waiting, and the armies are around them trying to get to them, and Jesus comes back and dyes his garments red, getting them. And that's why in Revelation chapter 19, we see heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it was called Faithful and True. And in righteousness he judges and makes war, and his eyes were like a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. And he had a name written that no one knew except himself. And he was clothed in a robe dipped in blood. Not his own blood. His blood, he shed on the cross for our sins. This blood is the blood of his enemies. And his name is called the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. That's the thing is, when we come back, we're going to fight with him. He's going to tread the winepress. He's going, we're going to be carrying swords. We're going to be in battle for victory. But when we get back, it's going to be like, woohoo! He won. We're not going to have to wield our swords. Now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword with he strikes the nations, and he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. He has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And so Edom, gives us their genealogy, but they have a long history of fighting against Israel and a future history even of fighting against Israel. Israel's common, just a sibling rivalry that has lasted the ages. So if you've grown up and you don't hate your sister, your brother, or your, whatever anymore, then praise the Lord, because it can, it doesn't end good. Anyway, let's pray.